I wanted to take a moment to talk about our sponsor, Alt21, the foreign exchange and hedging platform that saves you time and money on cross-border transactions. A previous guest, Dan Gardner, spoke about forecasting and risk. One of his central points was, as he put it, the things we're doing now are so incredibly complex, to see even a little bit into the future takes an enormous amount of struggle, and even then we're going to make mistakes. As CEO of Newroll, predicting just 12 months out is hard. As we expand, variables and risks multiply. Anything I can do to take risk off the table is helpful. In the past, I've been blind to the risk of FX exposure in our budgeting. A small movement could eat into our investment budget and compromise our credibility when our forecasts are wrong. If you want to remove risk from your foreign exchanges without breaking the bank, head to alt21.com. That's alt21.com to find out more. Hello and welcome to Enter the Boardroom with Newroll. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Newroll, a board search specialist and market leader bringing science to the art of board hiring. Private equity's approach to governance is distinctive, but Partners Group has a particularly unique approach, one that actively shapes board effectiveness through its NED network. Today, we're joined by Christian Unger, the architect behind this approach, to unpack what works, what doesn't, and what boards everywhere can learn. Christian's career spans CEO roles at Naspers, Bertelsmann, and Ringier, but what makes him such a fascinating guest today is his work at Partners Group, where he's rethinking how boards can drive value in private equity. Christian, a huge welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Oliver, for having me today. Thank you.
Christian, when we spoke, it struck me that Partners Group's approach to NEDs feels like a real innovation. Can you take us back to the beginning? What problem were you trying to solve?
Yeah, the beginning was around about 11 years ago, when we started with an approach that you still today see in a lot of PE firms, and we called that value creation. We had value creation teams that I was also building up, in-house teams that tried to add during the due diligence, but later after having acquired the company's value, either in project works or sometimes also in the boards by becoming board members. We built a team up to 60 value creation specialists. And after 3-4 years, we realized that this approach needs a different twist and a different approach. So we changed that. You still see the old approach we had in a lot of other firms. So I don't want to talk this down and say it doesn't work. Our experience was that we had difficulties to attract the CEO level, the top management level, to join us on a full-term basis and to work in our engine room. On one hand, we attracted consultants, we attracted some other PE experts or some industry specialists that wanted to do a sidestep, perhaps because in their careers they couldn't progress. But those profiles had some credibility issues from time to time in the boardroom towards the CEO of a portfolio company, towards our investment heads. On one hand, because they never had, or in nearly all the cases, never had board exposure before. And secondly, it also on the governance side created sometimes dysfunctionalities and questions when our Partners Group responsibles became active in joining project teams together with the portfolio company's management, where sometimes management had a, listen, if you want to do the job and if you do that for us, be our guest, but at some point, when it comes to the final responsibility and ownership, we had also difficulties to redirect all this back to the portfolio company because a lot of our people were involved. So we said that's probably not our governance model that we want to pursue. We also realized that scaling this up, we have 71 portfolio companies at the moment around the globe. We said it's too difficult to scale. We cannot just hire and hire in-house people. So we reshaped the model in a way that we said, okay, let's reduce the amount of in-house experts and let's surround us with board experts, previous CEOs that in the boardroom of our portfolio companies then take a very active role. So something at the moment where you would probably say that's so far what you explained is not very different to what other houses are doing and firms. I think our difference is that we are, first of all, create large boardrooms. So in average, we have 3 to 4 external board members. So always the chairman plus then 2 to 3 external board members, where other PE firms have probably 1 to 3 max, in average probably 1 to 2. And the second topic is that all of our board members need really to be active. So active means for chairman, 1 day a week, for NED, normal board members, a day every second week. And that we track the value creation initiatives that each of those board members have to be responsible for.
Can I go back to something you said at the beginning there? You said you were struggling to attract CEOs. Why did this new model address that?
Because the new offering is not a full-time in-house mandate that we give our potential board members. So now we have a network of around, as I said, if we have an average 3 to 4 external per portfolio company, 71 portfolio companies, around about 250 active board members, but they're active on the specific portfolio company that we have. And they are active, as I said, perhaps 1 day a week, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes as a normal board member, 1 day every second week, but they would not join us for a 4 to 5 day a week role by saying, okay, I do this asset as a board member, and then I do a little bit of research here, or a little bit of, so those profiles, they want to stay, they want to have a certain degree of freedom on their own agenda. They have a lot of other things in their life that they want to do, and they don't want to join a firm on a full-time basis. That was our experience. We have now certain colleagues and board members that have 2 or 3 boards, or 1 or 2 chairman roles. So that brings them to 2 to 3 days a week sometimes, but they are still independent and sometimes do something else in the week, but they would not come on a daily basis to our office.
Got it. So originally you were trying to engage them on a full-time basis, but they weren't willing to commit on that full-time basis without something concrete. Whereas once you allowed them to take more of a fractional role and you said, well, just 1 day a week, commit to this asset, that was what unlocked that struggle that you'd had of attracting this caliber. You said that some of the people you had been able to attract who were not those CEO profiles had credibility issues. They'd never had board exposure, and it created some dysfunctions within the governance structures. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. So we had very positive, let me start with the positive ones. The positive examples were the profiles where even if they had not been CEO before, they had a very defined, profound functional expertise. So a pricing expert, a supply chain expert that did that in his last 20 years in different industrial companies. So those that had really a functional expertise that could immediately be applied and where those people could immediately add value, and the CEO of the portfolio company or the management saw those results and saw that those were qualities and those were topics where they really immediately added value compared to what the company needed. This helped, and those profiles really added value, became active board members, appreciated board members. Every time where we had generalists, or even sometimes public board colleagues that were on several public boards, even some big trophy names sometimes, but where the profile was more around, asking the right questions, being on some committees, trying to sometimes challenge the CEO, but not equipped with a real expertise that was needed for the value creation of the firm, in addition to the expertise that was already there, either in the board or with management. Every time we saw this, we realized that this could perhaps be helpful for a certain point, but at the end, it was not deep enough in terms of value that would be brought to the portfolio company that would justify a permanent board mandate for those kind of boards.
Really interesting. I think that's one of the areas I most often see boards going wrong, where they appoint people who would be great for 2 years, but end up being good or worse, average, for 8, 9, 10 years. How have you distinguished in your mind between those different profiles? It sounds like you've gone for these CEO type figures for that longer duration value add, and more specialists, advisors for the shorter term value add.
Yeah, you're probably correct. The specialists, the functional specialists are probably more for the shorter period in time. Although sometimes if we acquire a company that is very dependent on supply chain optimization, as we just discussed before, I think this is a topic that can easily also last, and that it is perhaps a fix for the first 12 months, but later a much long-term project because we expand globally, internationally. And the quick fix was perhaps a topic in a country or where the company started, but the long term is then an expansion that the company goes together with us and where again supply chain will pop up as a bigger topic.
Tell me more about your thinking on the average board size. You made the point there that on average your boards of independents are bigger at 3 to 4 versus traditional private equity with 1 to 2. How have you convinced yourself that is the right path forward?
Good question. I think, first of all, we want independent boards. We start with a thesis. We do our due diligence. We surround us with some external experts that help us with our thesis. It's probably fair to say, even if we want people that challenge us also in the due diligence phase, we are still in an investment process, a deal-making process. We shape something that we believe in and that leads us hopefully to a successful transaction. But nevertheless, I think then when it is for holding period of, 5 years, sometimes even longer, 7 years, 10 years, we are also very clear that environment changes, priorities changes. We are also clear that a due diligence of a few months can never cover a long-term development that we want and a long-term transformation and value creation that we want to do with the company over such a long period of time during our holding. That can be 5 years plus. And therefore we want to equip us with the necessary bandwidth and depth of expertise in the boardroom, not only to pursue our initial value creation priorities, but also with some unexpected ones that might come and can help us with some difficulties that can suddenly pop up, or also that can push us to higher levels than what we have initially in our thesis. And if I look back to our most successful investment cases, that is probably where we realized the biggest upside, where we built boards, super challenging chairmen that challenged the CEOs and us as an owner in the boardroom to higher results than what we have expected and that we have initially planned for. And I think that is the beauty if you have bigger boards and you surround you with ambitious and highly skilled experts, that normally this creates an entrepreneurial spirit where you start with something, but then you want to overachieve that and you drive results upwards because you create a dynamic in the boardroom that is not only fixed to your initial value creation that you had, but that wants to top that and wants to excel together with the CEO and management. So I think the initial idea was probably, let's make it broader and secure ourselves for sometimes situations that we have not planned for. The upside that we saw is that if you do it right, you create an environment that helps you to push even for higher results than you have initially planned and you as a pure investor perhaps would have expected.
So my experience of that resonates a lot. One of the things we do are these pop-up boards where we create an on-demand board for a given issue for a CEO or senior executive. And what I love about those and my own experience of them is that instead of, as you might have with a board where maybe you have one expert in the room on a given topic, you can have 5 experts on the topic and you get one person who said, this is how I did it. And you can get another 4 who say, well, this is how I did it. And they're completely different. And so as a CEO, you feel that much more comfortable that you've considered a good range of options before working out what's best for you. Have you got to use data to figure out what the optimum mix is, or is this just based on your intuition that you haven't said, well, actually more is better, so let's get 8 or 10 independents on there or 15 independents?
So before I answer that, to your first point, I think you're perfectly right. I think especially in the American context where the CEO normally also is the president and tries to manage the boardroom, etc., our concept is probably the one that is really having a complete different mindset and needs also a different mindset for a CEO, to work actively with the board on strategy, not to present already a pre-baked and shaped strategy, but to develop that strategy together with the board and the chairman. And then going to your second part, we have seen that on a board level, we don't want to have more than, let's say, 7, 8 really fundamental strategic transformational strategies at the same point in time. So I think something between 5 to 7, really key initiatives when it comes to transformational initiatives. Of course, you can have more also because you want to ensure that the margins are always very tightly followed up, or some metrics on operational topics, on supply chain topics are really followed up. But we saw that if you do more than, let's say, 5, 7, transform an organization, it doesn't go well. And this is too much at once. As we said, every board member should have probably one initiative or two that he's responsible for. We want one that has the final responsibility, even if other board members are supporting on an initiative. We don't want to have 2 or 3 doing this together. They can join, but there's one who really drives and is responsible for it. That brings it then probably to 3 to 4 external and 2 to 3 internal colleagues. So a board size of 7, 8 people max. Sometimes we have also colleagues, other PE investors together with us that have a minority stake, that are also invested with us and therefore have a board seat as well. So we have situations where we have larger boards, but conceptually it's probably, 5 to 7 initiatives. And then every of those board members should own one of those.
That's interesting. So it's actually the number of initiatives that an organization can handle that's the limiting factor, rather than the number of board members.
Yeah. Yes. You don't want to have a board, let's say, with more than probably 10 people, 12 people, then it'd be inefficient, even if you probably would have so many activities in initiatives, because this is an interaction with the CEO, with the management. So we have also to be careful that we don't overload from a just people management perspective the board, and that the CEO and CFO or perhaps ops management is then always in charge to manage those initiatives with the board and has no time for the company left. So it's probably as you put it, theoretically it's correct, but there's also kind of a human aspect into it where it's okay, you need to dedicate to everybody that you have in the board a certain amount of time. Everybody in the board will take time with somebody in the organization as well. So I would say something, around 7, and perhaps sometimes an observer on top.
That's very much aligned with the data that I've seen on this, where the efficacy of a board drops off once you go above 8 people. Whenever I hear people are on boards with, 10 plus people, I say to them, that's the first thing you've got to fix.
Yeah. And this you see often in public boards. If you see those large boards, we see it sometimes. We have 2, 3 other investors with us and everybody has a board seat, but none of them would want to take an active board role as we do. And if it is too big, you create probably also, this kind of spirit and kind of attitude starts to get diluted as well.
You talked about those 5 to 7 transformational strategies you might be pursuing in any one organization at a given time. Can you bring that to life for me with an example? And I suppose I'm particularly interested in understanding, are there recurring strategies across most portfolio companies and then 1 or 2 that are more unique, or is it unique across them all?
Yeah. So let's take a board where I'm on USIC. It's a big company in the US, and there's one strategy. It started with 1, and perhaps we will even now separate it into 2. And that is a topic that is now recurring for all of our portfolio companies. And that is around digital disruption, digital innovation, digital strategy towards competition, or perhaps also identification of potential competition. So that is something we want to have really on every of our portfolio companies, where we as an owner push a lot, where we say, okay, we want to know, what is your thesis on that? What are the disruptional elements that could be big opportunities for this firm? And where we also believe as an owner, we have accumulated a lot of knowledge, and with all our different board members and networks can probably add value to the company. So that is something that we want to see in all of our boardrooms when it comes to really future development of the company, transformational development. What is the digital impact? And that is always one of the big initiatives. And I said, for example, for USIC, we have started with that a few years ago. Now we see a lot of this digital initiative starts to become operational and starts to become real. And we might want to keep that, but want to add, to put this more then into this kind of, okay, to-do list, what the CEO and the management has to do, because we have identified and worked on that a few years ago. And this is now getting concrete. Okay, what could happen now in the next 2 to 3 years, and want to keep that kind of momentum going. So we might develop from 1 into 2 initiatives, because one is becoming a little bit more tactical already and operational. The other ones are, well, they depend a lot on, let's say, also the sector and the company is in. I think one other one that we see is, it's difficult to give you percentages, but perhaps relevant for 60-70% of our assets is always also pricing, pricing initiatives, dynamic pricing. We see that in a lot of cases, when we take over an asset, the pricing dimension is always a little bit hesitant in this one and are careful and saying, let's not endanger customer relationships. We know what we are doing. We are well positioned. We are growing enough. Let's not touch that. We did that for the last 10 years like we do it now. So why are you rocking the boat? And, pricing always sounds that we want to increase prices. And that's perhaps not even the case. We just want to really understand the dynamics and the customer satisfaction dimensions, what the customer really wants. Is it finally price, or is it a certain quality level? Is it a timing level, or is it more the time to market that is relevant? And because the company always delivers right on time, the customer is willing to pay the price. So it is much more multidimensional than only pricing. If we talk about dynamic pricing, it finally leads to a deep understanding of customer behavior and customer change also of our portfolio company. So that is something where we, again, have accumulated a lot of knowledge with what we have done in the past, and where we encourage in our onboarding sessions with our portfolio companies in the first 6 months. We encourage, but sometimes we check and push also that this becomes an important topic. So that is another one. I would say for our goods and product companies, it's also quality, product development topics, how are products developed. This is a big one as well. On the healthcare side, it is the whole patent development, the whole, regulation development. So I think there are a few constant initiatives that we see on top of, let's say, digitalization, pricing, but they depend then on the area where the company operates. A few years ago, we had ESG obviously always in there as well, ESG initiatives. And I think this is a little bit deranked now. I think this is perhaps something we have to do, but perhaps not always on a top strategic level within those 5 to 7 initiatives that we see on the top level. So we need to ensure that this is happening. We, in our onboarding phase, check that, and we sometimes obviously also work on that one, but it's perhaps less super strategic than the other ones.
Can you bring that pricing line to life with an example? What might a senior exec board member listening to this who hasn't been exposed to the level of sophistication that you are looking at these things learn from an example that you've been involved with?
Well, as you are from the UK, I was on the board of Civica. It's a software company that is providing software solutions for government institutions. So, for example, for hospitals, for bus transportation services, etc. And the company is a well-known, super established building block for software development. We sold the company a few years ago. Blackstone is the new owner. During our ownership period, we did a lot of things, obviously, but one was to review the whole pricing strategy with the company, and in that case, even we worked together at the beginning with an external consultancy, then decided to put this as a top priority in the boardroom, because we realized that pricing for the customer was a multidimensional satisfactional exercise. It was not only the price, it was at the beginning much more the quality of the product, but we realized it was the quality of the product. And when we went deep into this, we realized that as being very close with the customer, there was a frustration from the customer side that we would not do more with them together when it came to new product development. But what we realized with the pricing strategy and our initiative is that we started to become, with certain top customers, their development center for new products. So it was then less, putting a correct price tag to our existing products, or identifying a need or a wish to have those products delivered faster, or sometimes perhaps even with a less high quality, but therefore cheaper. So all what you would think of, it was more about, no, help us together here develop new products and price them as you wish, because they are new to us. We can't tell you also what we would expect as a customer, what this would cost. And that helped us to position this company and to put the foot of this company product suite into the customer's ecosystem in a way that, well, would not want to say we completely locked Civica in, but we had a completely different position as a kind of co-partner with the customer to develop new products at a very different price, at a very different margin, and completely justified though, because the value of those new products became obviously they were much higher for them, because they said, if Civica can develop those new products for us that we would otherwise have somehow to develop on our own, we are probably also much more willing to pay higher prices than for much more standardized software solutions, where I would say the Civica solution was super innovative at the beginning, but became over time also a little bit more a commodity. So I think with the pricing initiative, we started an innovation cycle together with the portfolio company that helped, I would say, both sides.
Now, you've worked with a lot of non-executives across different companies. You've got 250 roles across the portfolio. I imagine some of them have made an outsized impact. Do you have any stories that you could share with us when a non-exec completely changed the game for a company?
Yes, I think there are certain patterns that definitely stand out. So you're right, we have 250 active, but we have in total probably a group of 500 now of executives that did work for us in the past and on companies either that we sold or where they were punctually involved. So a really big group of high calibers. And I think what stands out, what we always see on one hand, is this entrepreneurial attitude of never accepting something as a giving and something that really works well, not to say, okay, let's bank on it and let's continue or let's optimize it. We see a pattern of profiles that always question, even if things look perfect and look great, or a margin looks exceptional compared to industrial averages, or NPS scores look amazing compared to competitors' NPS scores. So the DNA of saying, okay, that's good that we did this and we have achieved that, but that doesn't mean anything to me. Let's see if we cannot go for the better and even improve that. So this energy to always want to be better than others and delivering a better solution, another product, is a pattern that we see. And what does that exactly mean for the board? It is in situations where we have, and we try obviously to get really high performing CEOs, management teams, but where, the board and the chairman is even challenging the best results, and saying, I give you one example. Global Logic in the US, a spectacular CEO at that time, Shashank, who now is with Hitachi, the company that bought Global Logic. But we brought in a chairman that said, Shashank and Global Logic, and they were on a trip growing 30% per year for the last 3-4 years, over exceeding our investment thesis, our plans. And the chairman said, well, Shashank, you delivered always your budget. You're always slightly above. Let's see what you can really do. And he changed the targets upwards, and we were all a little bit scared because we said, perhaps this is not rocking the boat, or is rocking the boat too much and destabilizing the organization. And of course, the CEO cried, and of course, management cried, and of course, we didn't achieve the result for the first time since years for the next 1 to 2 quarters. But oh wonder, 3 quarters later, the achievements were there again, and it's difficult to quantify, but I would say in this case, the chairman pushed really the budget upwards for another 10% top line growth. And we sold this company then later to Hitachi for nearly 8 billion. And if you would do the math, you could say, if we would have continued like we did before very successfully, perhaps we would have achieved, 6.5 billion or so. But the other billion, the last billion, came really from this approach of saying, you're all very great overachievers, but I think you're a little bit lazy. We can do more, and let's do more together. So always this attitude to ignore the reality in a sense of let's always challenge this, even if it's a great result, as if it would be a not so good one. I think that's a pattern that we have seen across the board.
It reminds me of a comment Dr. Tomasz Chamora-Przemysl made in episode 113, where he talked about some of the character traits, the big 5 character traits that you're looking for, and agreeableness is one of those big 5. And it sounds like what you're saying there is you're seeing value in those people who score low on the agreeableness spectrum, who are always looking to challenge. But in my experience, there's a risk there. You get people who disagree for the sake of it, and it's not rooted in any reality, and that can end up irritating people. Can you bring to life why that worked in that example? Why was that chair able to get more out of business than others had seen?
Yeah, it needs to be embedded in realistic also argumentation. Now, I think characters that are only disruptive in a sense of saying, hey, I don't believe in that, or I think we can do better here, I think that's not enough. I think these are high performing teams. These are super performing CEOs that deliver for years exceptional results, that work with exceptional investment firms together, hand in hand. So if you come in and fly in and say, listen, I have a great idea and let's do this together and I can show you how that works for the better. There are 2 scenarios. Either you're kicked out of the room immediately, or people say, okay, let's test him out and let's set him up for failure. So I think that's also a pattern of high performance boardrooms, that it creates an environment where such an attitude or those kind of profiles somehow have a very short lifespan and are somehow not long-term participants of the value creation world. So I believe that the cases that we have seen were always different willingnesses to take risks, where they recalibrated perhaps the view of management or the view of the boardroom and said, listen, you have been able to achieve now for the last 5 years always what you wanted. And we can take a higher risk level now. You can take another delegation on certain topics to some of your top team members in order that you take different energy level and a different time level of a new initiative. And so this was more probably reading the organization in a sense. How can we give certain topics back to management and tackle new topics either faster because they were already identified, but the organization said, let's take a certain amount of time, or where they said, listen, the company is now ready and we are ready to take another risk level. So to go into a new country now because you are performing in France. UK is a high competitive environment, but let's try to do that. Now let's go there, or let's go now for a bigger M&A play. You have always acquired once per year, twice per year companies with, 5, 10, 50 million EBITDA. I think your organization, your M&A department is now ready to digest also 50 million EBITDA bites. So I think it is not about injecting new ideas or being more intelligent or smarter than others. I think that doesn't work. I think it's more about organizing the priorities of the firm, because you have a super good instinct and experience to be able to allocate work differently and to push certain highly ambitious people that are highly successful and have always delivered everything correctly to different levels. And that creates the credibility also for those people, because all of us want to be challenged. If you are challenged in a way that somebody is giving you targets where you say, holy shit, this is a little bit too ambitious. But on the other hand, you have a sense it is realizable. And you get a sense, okay, you have people that help you in that trajectory, then that can work.
It's interesting. It feels, the way you articulated it there, very nebulous. The line between the person who challenges without that credibility and without that trust and without that instinct, and the person who does it, who has all of those things, feels like a very fine line. And for someone listening to this, trying to work out, I guess the person who doesn't have it won't know they don't have it. Is there anything more tangible that you can bring out from that global logic example that would help someone struggling with that nebulousness to get a better hold of what it is that takes them from the wrong side of that line to the right side of that line.
Yeah. Well, it's also not wrong or right, but back to perhaps global logic as one of those examples is, of course, and that's the role. Not every CEO has to fight for the budget and has to protect management and the team for other ideas, initiatives, and has to make sure that the budget and the path the company has taken is pursued, is delivered, and is correctly achieved. In the case of global logic, I think what we did is that we looked at the average client ticket, and the sales teams and the CEO as a top salesman as well. They were all running for 10, 15 million tickets. And there were a few that perhaps had 20, 25 million US dollar volumes. And we encouraged them, it was a little bit more even an encouragement to listen, from now on, please stop those 10 million tickets. Our biggest pain point and restriction is the time, the energy that our top sales people have, but also our top developers do have in order to develop those app solutions, software solutions, etc. And we said from now on, from next year on, you run for minimum 20 million tickets, and everything that is below you don't accept. And that without knowing, how much probability there will be that we will achieve those 20 to 50 million tickets. So we didn't put, at that time when we articulated that, we didn't put a very concrete list of clients behind it and saying, now you run for those 200 clients because we know that they all will have 20 to 50 million volumes. We didn't do this homework, which we perhaps should have done at that time, but we didn't do it. We left it at the attitude level where we said, those guys, if they're able to bring home all the time those 5 to 10 million ones, then they should be able to bring home the bigger ones. And the culture of the firm at that time was never that. They were very happy and very self-confident with those client profiles. And we really pushed them and said, listen, we are not going to overgrow this and overperform because we will never be able to digest many more of those smaller ones if we are not able to completely change the client mix. So it was more, again, this rethinking and encouraging them to understand our rethinking combined with a little bit of, attracting and teasing their ambition to go for also that higher level of perhaps performance.
I think you've given me a penny drop moment there, which is, it sounds like what that board did well was it looked at this high performing engine and it identified where are the limiting factors that are stopping this engine going faster. And when, as an executive team, you've got your head down, sometimes the limiting factors get lost in the noise. By focusing on that limiting factor, those smaller ticket sizes, which were taking up a lot of time, you suddenly enabled them to create the capacity to move even faster.
Yes, that's correct.
You talked about measuring board member value. What has your data revealed to you that might not be obvious to someone who doesn't have the scale or data analytics that you've got available to you?
Well, first, there are no shortcuts. The people that don't work a lot at the end also don't achieve a lot. This thinking of being a magician and running because you're so bright and so smart and having seen it into a board situation, management situation, and fixing it in a short time span is probably a little bit naive. So we have seen that the ones that really work hard, that really take the time to understand the management team, to understand the customers, that do site visits together with management, that think and work really thoroughly through topics in order to become a credible sparring partner to the management team, that this drives super results and also a lot of satisfaction for the management, but also for us, and drives good results. And we have seen the opposite as well, where people come in and out and say, listen, I work the sector. I've been a CEO here before. I know this and this we can do like that. So I think a very humble approach and be willing to put the necessary time and effort into it is probably a hygiene factor that you need to have in order to be super successful. I have rarely seen the other way around.
Can you quantify that? What does that mean? Because I often look at board members who've gone plural and I divide the number of hours there are, we've all got 168 hours in a week, and you look at across the year and I work out how much time they're actually spending on per board role. And I just think they can never add value with that amount of time.
No.
So is there, what does that curve look like? Is there a tail off after a certain number of hours? And what's the minimum threshold in order to be meeting that work hard bar?
I would say a person can only have 2 to 3 chairman mandates, or otherwise he is or she is on too many different topics and sectors. And on board mandates, I also think 3-4 boards max, not more. So everybody that tells me he sits on, 8 boards or so is probably no profile for Partners Group. But it just doesn't work because there are too many limiting factors. It's not only the time, it's also, I think, the mental, how much time you park in your head for certain topics, how much flexibility you have around your agendas to work suddenly 2 to 3 days a week if need be, to show also that you can do that, makes you credible towards management. So I would say that is probably the prerequisite, that you don't do too many things. I don't, and we don't do that at Partners Group, believe that an active CEO can be an active board member. It just doesn't work. I think an active CEO should be an active CEO on his asset and not already look at left and right for board engagements. I think that is a chapter that is for later, but not while he's an active or she's an active CEO.
Because time is flying. Before we go to the lightning round, I just quickly want to understand, how prescriptive are you with your boards across the network on the meeting cadence they have and the structure of the board meetings? To what extent do you measure that?
So we have playbooks. That's something that we have developed over the last years extensively. So we have playbooks, onboarding playbooks, because there's a lot of insecurity at who is this new owner looking like? What is his expectation level? Some companies have never worked with PE before. So we do that. We do strategy playbooks. We give them really guidance on what we believe is a good strategy. So not only operational achievements, but really go deep and how can you develop that? And you would be surprised how difficult it is to put together a concise strategy playbook of perhaps 20, 30 pages that still is read by some top executives. We do this also on a restructuring side. So if companies are in more difficult situations, we give them expectations from our side that we want them to work on as a playbook, but not as a book to be taken and a checklist to be filled out. We want to tell them this is our direction of travel that we want to see from you. And then you come back and tell us what you do with that. So that's on the fundamental side. On the other side, on the cadence, that is very standardized. There are certain different rhythms, but at least, 4 to 6 board meetings per year, at least 1 big strategy meeting a year of 2-3 days. So there are some rules that apply to every board and asset. And then there are some additional more ad hoc either or some more specific topics where we ask also for different levels of engagement. But this is very formalized in a sense of giving clear guidance, but also with the possibility to deviate from it. If somebody and a CEO has a very important reason to deviate from it, because like, for example, USIC, as I mentioned at the beginning, where I'm on the board, we had a critical situation a year ago with client contract. Then we said, listen, the board at the moment goes not silent, but goes much more passive, except the ones that work on client relationships. But let's park digitalization. Let's park a few things for a few moments and months, because the CEO top management has to secure the most important basis of our business, our client relationships. So we can deviate from it if we as a board together decide and report back to Partners Group. But otherwise, we have that clear guidance. And our experience is that it helps a lot, because I think agreeing on your levels of expectations, deliverables, etc., is serving everybody.
Christian, time has flown, which means it's time for the lightning round, where I'm going to ask you a quick question and ask you for a brief response if you're ready.
Sure.
Best book every board member should read and why?
Well, I have to say the Elon Musk biography from Isaacson is a good one. And the other one perhaps is the Einstein biography from Isaacson as well. But I would say the Musk biography is one I would encourage everybody to read.
What's one boardroom behavior that should be banned?
I think arrogance should be. It can be also intellectual arrogance. So arrogance really in a lot of aspects.
What's one board ritual that actually works?
Having a clear agenda around the initiatives, and starting with the initiatives and not with the committees and the risk and audit committees, etc. Emphasizing the actual important work of the company and not the control mechanisms that control the work of the company.
Favorite quote?
Favorite quote, old one, perhaps from Jack Welch: control your own destiny, otherwise somebody else will.
Your most significant professional insight?
Things actually take longer than you expect, and don't shoot for too short-term results.
Worst professional advice you've ever received?
Understand the organization and our culture first before you come to conclusions. I think it's wrong. I think you need to understand your customers first, and with that as well, then the organization.
What have you changed your mind on about boards over time?
The business and less around format. At the beginning, and you heard me talking a lot about public boards, I think you still see a lot of format discussions and formalities, etc., and procedural discussions, and this has completely changed. I think this is all useless, and I think it should be about the business itself.
Tell us about a time you were dead wrong in the boardroom. What happened, and what did you learn?
In cases where people were very prudent, sometimes shy in talking about new initiatives, new strategies, and I thought, well, these are profiles that could develop the company forward, and we discredited their achievements of the past because they were probably focusing on operational deliverables. So a tendency sometimes to overrank new strategies over old existing recipes that worked and continue to work. So under perhaps overestimating disruptive importance in certain cases. I know that the trend of the day is to say the opposite, that boards are, etc., not disruptive enough. But I think I had also severe cases where we pushed management in disruptive thinking and completely destabilized the organization and the rest where it was not necessary. So I think it's important to find the right balance.
If you had a billboard in front of every boardroom, what 3 things would it say?
We want all our secrets. Transformational strategy, clients, results, and investment needs.
So those would be the focus areas.
If you give me only 3.
How many would you need for it to be complete as a billboard?
I think another one is around people, and management. There's certainly also the other one as a 4th one.
Christian, that has been a fantastic insight into the way you think about the boardroom. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience.
Thank you.